In today's episode, Alex and I discuss updating electrical wiring without destroying plaster walls. And later, I chat with Alison Hardy, who launched the window restoration company Window Woman of New England nearly 20 years ago. But first, I'm Stacey Grinsfelder from Blake Hill House, and I am the host of True Tales from Old Houses. Hello, everyone. Breaking news, I have been inspecting my yard daily and the snowbells have arrived. I repeat, the snowbells have arrived. Snowbells are those tiny, delicate white flowers that pop up all over town. And as I mentioned last episode, they are the first real sign of spring here, whether we've marked the vernal equinox or not. Yes, it is a slow news day here at Blake Hill House, and my life right now consists of looking for signs of spring and chasing the deer off my lawn. Those deer are stealing my small joys. They ate everything, and most recently they destroyed the 10-foot tall, 50-year-old rhododendrons as far as their little deer necks could reach. Those once massive bushes look like topiaries now, and it's going to take about 2 or 3 seasons for them to recover. So disappointing. Can we talk about deer for just a minute? Until we moved here, I'd lived in or near national parks for most of my life, and something that is drilled into everyone when you visit a national park is that you don't approach the wildlife or encourage any interaction between animals and humans, especially feeding them. Feeding wild animals destroys their diets and it creates a reliance on humans. In short, animals lose the ability to fend for themselves when people try to turn them into Disney characters. At best, dependent animals become a nuisance. We've all seen videos of cute little squirrels or chipmunks stealing someone's snack out of their pocket or something like that. But at worst, animals become dangerous and they have to be put down, which is so sad. An example of that would be like a big bear that keeps breaking into cabins or cars in search of people food, or very aggressive behavior from a typically docile or shy animal like a mountain lion, for instance. I just realized that nothing I'm talking about relates to old houses, but I will try to tie this all together somehow. Anyway, that is my background, and apparently in my town, many people are not aware of or concerned about upsetting the human versus animal balance. So the situation now is that we live in a village that is entirely too hospitable for our wildlife, and the deer population and their behavior is out of control. There is no such thing as survival of the fittest here. We have a young, 3-legged doe that roams the neighborhood, and last year, she gave birth to a set of twins. I don't think that would happen in the wild. First, she may not have even survived to adulthood, and if she had, it is really unlikely that she would have been chosen by a buck. It wasn't just her that had babies either. Last season, there was a bumper crop of fawns. While it is common for does to give birth to twins, I counted 3 sets of them last summer, and that was mixed in with several single births too. The herd closest to my house grew to about 15, and there are more herds all over town. There are so many that most of the perennial landscaping plants that were once considered deer resistant, they're now just part of the salad bar. And you know that deer spray that smells horrible and tastes like hot peppers? They now love that too. It's salad dressing. The deer diet is changing. I recognize that this is one of the best arguments in favor of natural landscaping and native plants, and I'm certainly making adjustments around here, lesson learned. But I also want to be clear that my town is surrounded by acres and acres of wild land and woods. So at this point, it's not about being pushed out of their habitat. It's about humans making life in the village too easy and too good. And this isn't going to end well. So that is why I chase deer out of my yard. I don't want them to like me. We don't have to be friends. I am happy to enjoy them from afar. Now, my dog Millie, she used to do an admirable job keeping the deer away, but apparently she is retired now. Last summer, we had a herd sleeping out on the lawn less than 50 feet from the door, like it was a campground or something. And Millie just looked at me like, that's too much work. And she hasn't really chased them since. That's my job now. So what's your take? Are deer delightful woodland creatures or the neighborhood scourge? And in true internet fashion, I'm only giving you 2 choices. You are either all in or you are canceling deer. It's your choice. No, really though, I would love to hear your thoughts on wildlife management and gardening at your old house. See, I tied it all together. Because I recognize that my upbringing was not the norm. So shoot me a DM or an email. In other news, April 15th, 16th, and 17th, I will be in Fort Wayne, Indiana. If anyone wants to book me for a window restoration consultation or have an impromptu old house gathering somewhere fun, I'll drop a link to my scheduling calendar in the show notes. Then May 13th through 15th, Steve Quillian of Wood Window Makeover is hosting another historic homes workshop in the Tampa Bay, Florida area. And I'll be there teaching an hour-long session on Saturday and leading a group through basic window restoration and maintenance on Sunday. Steve used to host this as a yearly event, but this one will be the first one since COVID locked everything down. There'll be several pros there, and it's always an excellent learning opportunity, and the weather isn't half bad either. I attended in 2019, and I made some great friends, learned a lot. Again, I'll put a link in the show notes, and tickets are on sale now. And finally, you only have a few days left to reserve your spot on the tour that I'm hosting to Scotland and Northern Ireland through holiday vacations. The tour is July 12th through 22nd. It starts in Scotland, and we work our way down to Dublin, which I recognize is not in Northern Ireland. It just happens to be our departing city. This is a fantastic opportunity to see Scotland and Northern Ireland while somebody else does all the planning and all the driving. But there's also plenty of free time built in if you're a control freak like me. And I just found out that my previous co-host, Devin, booked the trip, so he will be there too. We'll be working on a podcast while we're there. Final payments are due April 8th. You can find out more about the trip by going to holidayvacations.com. Click on the bar at the bottom of the header image that says local station keyword. The keyword is Stacy with no E. And if that's all too complicated, don't worry about it. I'll just put a link to it in the show notes on truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Or you can send me an email or direct message through Facebook or Instagram if you need any help. I have a lot of stuff to tell you today. The last thing I guess really is that there is a new Instagram live session available on my Blake Hill House Instagram account and the True Tales from Old Houses Facebook group too. My sincere apologies for the last session that I promoted as a smart home discussion. I did not understand the assignment. My guest, Katie, actually talked about low energy solutions and devices to prevent floods and fires. Good stuff, but probably not what you expected. So I booked Alex from Old Town Home to talk about integrating smart home apps and technology in old houses. And as usual, he was excellent. He uses gadgets, honestly, for almost everything. And he talked a lot about digital safety and privacy too. I know that a lot of us are interested in using smart home technology, but we have a lot of safety concerns. So if you're interested in that, that session is available now. And the next Instagram Live session will be Friday, April 8th at 8 p.m., and I'll announce the topic and guest earlier that week. And speaking of Alex, he's here to do Q&A with me today. Hi, Alex.
Hey, Stacy. Thanks for having me back.
Well, I have missed your voice around here, so welcome back.
You didn't get enough of it from Instagram and everything like that in my long, monotonous, boring videos.
No, never. I can never get enough of that, Alex. That actually, I was going to say, any big news or surprises for you since the last time we talked? Of course, I have an advantage because I see you on Instagram, but is there anything you wanted to share?
We've been extremely productive. There's been a lot of projects that we've been knocking out, small and large. The biggest is we actually hired out a project, which is very strange for us. And we had a large retaining wall, seawall installed along our property line to prevent more property erosion from the tidal water that we live on.
Wow. I bet that was a fascinating project to watch. Is it done?
Yeah, it's done almost. We have to do a bunch of plantings because it's in the critical area and you have to do buffer mitigation and all sorts of stuff. So we have to do plantings before spring. But I was super jealous of my contractor the whole time because of the equipment that he had. I don't know. There's something about a job where you have a bunch of heavy equipment that you tow around on a barge with a tugboat. I would not mind that career.
You wanted to drive it, didn't you?
Yes, absolutely.
For some of us, that little kid urge never goes away. And I'm one of those people too. Like every time I see like a tractor or something, I think, ooh, I wish I could drive that.
Yeah, they said, so we're going to start with the backhoe and everything, and then we'll be bringing the barge up and docking at your pier, and then we'll offload stuff. And I was like, wait a second, you're bringing the barge to my house? This is going to be amazing.
Oh, so fun. So fun. I wish that was like one of the Q&A or one of the questions from the audience, like, have you ever had to do a seawall? Because then I would absolutely say, we should talk about that for 20 minutes, Alex.
Absolutely. There was the whole permitting process. I did all the permitting and engineer drawings and everything. That took me about 6 months, start to finish. And then The hard part is just getting on people's schedule because of how in demand marine contractors are.
Right. Super interesting. Well, are you ready for today's question?
I am ready.
Okay. The question is, do you have any advice for replacing knob and tube without substantial wall damage? I think you and I both have some thoughts on this, but before we talk about it, I'm just going to give a really quick explanation of what knob and tube is. Knob and tube was an electrical wiring method I think, 1950s, maybe. It was kind of the original electricity.
Yeah, pretty much. And it may even a little bit earlier than that, 40s and before. It was pretty common.
So basically, the live wire, there are two wires, live and a neutral. They're separated from each other and insulated with a type of fabric and rubber. There's no third ground wire like we have today in modern electricity. And nowadays, our three wires, the live, the neutral, and the ground, they're all insulated separately, but packaged together in a metal or plastic jacket or sheathing, depending on where that electricity is going, commercial, residential, whatever. So in knob and tube, those two wires, the live and the neutral, they run up your wall cavities side by side. And to keep them from touching the wood and each other, the wires were secured to porcelain knobs. Then, when they had to pass through solid wood, such as a joist, those holes were lined with porcelain tubes, and the wires ran through those tubes, thus the name knob and tube. Makes sense now, right?
They're pretty, I mean, the thing about knob and tube wiring too, when you look at it, they're very utilitarian, beautiful. You've got porcelain fixtures all through your house to deal with electrical. It's a lot more fancy than our current day plastic.
Right, exactly. And it was a decent system as long as the wires never touched each other and the insulation remained intact.
Right.
But if those wires touched or something else sparked an exposed wire, then it could cause a fire. And then, of course, nothing lasts forever. And electrical wire, I think, is really at its best only for about 50 to 70 years. So some of us have knob and tube that's over 100 years old.
Not to mention the fact that the fabric wrapping on it has dried out over time and has started to crack in a lot of situations. So even if it's still intact in good shape, it still becomes dangerous due to what you're saying about having a life expectancy, essentially.
Right. And little critters can chew that up, or if you have some insulation that you've blown in, and all of a sudden you just have a situation that's really ready for, or could be ready for a bad fire. I talked to Fire Chief LeBlanc, and he was talking about, I live in this community with primarily old houses. He's my fire chief, and he was talking about the fact that most of the fires that he sees were started with knob and tube. So
I definitely believe it. When you see knob and tube in houses and you see how exposed everything is, especially in attic areas where people are probably moving things around with storage and everything, it's very easy to see how things can get bumped even slightly over many years. And before you know it, you have a fracture and a compromise of the system. And it's very easy to start a fire, especially like you said, if there's new insulation that's now packed in around that.
absolutely. All right. So to get back to our question, I'm going to let you answer it first. Do you have any advice for replacing knob and tube without substantial wall damage?
Yes, absolutely. There's a handful of approaches that I've seen that work really, really well. One is first step of everything is deactivating the knob and tube. You don't necessarily have to remove anything unless you want to. If you deactivate it by disconnecting it from its circuits, so that knob and tube wiring is no longer active and no longer driving anything, then it can stay in the wall indefinitely. It's not going to cause an issue if there's no electricity running through it, essentially. So first step, just kind of taking a step back and looking at your overall project and saying, what electricity is driven from the knob and tube wiring, and figuring out what outlets, what lights you ultimately need to replace with modern wiring. It's not like you have to run the modern wiring right where the old knob and tube was or anything like that. Otherwise, you're just kind of tearing up everything, especially if the house was built with the knob and tube and not added after.
Right.
That's one distinction here is a lot of houses that predate electricity, the knob and tube was added afterwards, and somebody would have had to have added that. So you can reuse a lot of those access points for running new electricity as well. Houses that were built with knob and tube as part of the construction of the house in the early 1900s, that's a little bit different idea because you've got things that are concealed behind walls, behind plaster, and you don't necessarily want to rip everything out to get access to run new wires.
And something we didn't make clear was that the damage that this person is talking about is sometimes when you hire an electrician to come in and replace your knob and tube or run new wiring, they'll do what's called, what is it, channeling or something,
Yeah.
where they basically go up and just punch holes, tons of them. They could do one every foot, even if they're particularly sadistic, and
Yes.
chop your plaster up so that they can fish wires from the room to either pull them down to the basement or up to the attic or whatever the situation
And
is.
that makes sense. I mean,
Yeah,
time is money. So why not do it so that it's faster and easier for them? And then you can get your plasterers or sheetrockers in to come in and fix it. But that's not how a lot of people want to approach this in terms of minimizing damage.
right, exactly.
So, I mean, when I'm looking at something like this, obviously, usually this starts with hiring a qualified electrician, talking to your electrician and saying what your goal is. You want to minimize damage. You want to retain certain lights, certain outlets. You could decommission some outlets that are not necessary anymore. That may make the job easier. But the best way is to work with, either if you're doing the work or working with an electrician, finding a path of least resistance from what your electrical panel is to an area of your house where you can then have the wiring spread out and then go down. And usually what I'm talking about is if you're trying to run electrical in your first floor, you're working from the basement up or crawl space up. You usually do that up through, you run the wiring out and then up through the walls on either side to where outlets need to be so that it's easy to get wiring to your fixtures without doing a lot of damage to the walls. And then likewise, working from the top down, going from the attic down into the house, into your second floor. Again, for lights, for outlets, for switches, there's a lot of times easy ways to run from the attic into existing wall cavities, especially with old balloon framed houses, where you don't have to tear out the wall in order to run electricity and you just fish things down to outlets.
That's true. And this is a very timely question because we've been updating our wiring on the second floor. And we did have a sub panel put in the attic because when I first started talking about to the electrician, when he was thinking about pricing, and I'm not really sure why. Maybe we just hadn't gotten to my question yet of can we run it upstairs? But he was thinking more like from the second floor down past the first floor down to the panel. And a lot that's a lot of things to bump into if you're trying to fish wires from a second floor all the way down to the basement. You've got the first
Yes.
floor and whatever is in the wall. So I said, would a sub panel in the attic be less expensive? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. And I said, well, let's do that then.
Yep, I was going to bring up subpanels because that's a great way to sort of split things out. When you're talking about modern electricity, a lot of times people think of everything needing to make what's called home runs back to the main panel. If your breaker is down there, and usually in the basement or on the first floor, or even outside, depending on where you are in the country, um, people want to make home runs of individual circuits, usually like 12 gauge wire, Romex, back to the main panel in order to hook into the circuit there. If you're looking at your overall load in your house and you say, well, we could put a sub panel in the attic with a 40 amp circuit, 50 amp circuit, something like that, you just have to make a single run of wire from your main panel to that sub panel, and then you can branch out from that sub panel. If you're doing that, it's good to have a good detailed electrical diagram for yourself and future homeowners that tell you what circuits or what breakers go where, so that you know if something flips or trips that you need to go to the attic instead of to the basement to trip something back. But that's an easy thing to take care of with documentation and saves a lot of money, time, effort, and also destruction.
I must say I have excellent electricians because when I told them, I said, I want to keep my walls as intact as possible. They said, plaster's a little unforgiving at times. How disappointed would you be if we had some, cracks here and there when we cut out places for outlets or switches? And I said, not a problem. Just do your best because that's not trenching. That's just sort of collateral damage from making a
Yes.
cut into old dry plaster. And so maybe that's something you want to talk to. You want to kind of listen, keep your ears open when you're talking to an electrician about how they might approach the issue. Because if they tell you, oh, this can't be done without trenching your walls, then you will know that you heard from Alex and I that that is incorrect and that maybe you should interview some more people. But in all fairness, not all parts of the country, not all cities and towns will have somebody qualified like that to come in and do this electrical work without damaging your walls. But
Right.
just keep asking around, see what you can find. If for some reason you can't get that kind of person, then you would know that you'd have to build in some repair, either time or money or both, into your whole project.
And one of the things to remember is sometimes damage is unavoidable. As long as it's planned, as long as you know what to expect, that's what's important. We live right down the street from George Washington's Mount Vernon. And they were putting in a new fire suppression system, I think, in 2019. And it was very interesting to visit the house during that period because they had the rooms where they were doing the work open so that you could see the type of work that they were doing. And you have to imagine when you're running a fire suppression system, you're running a lot of, large piping in order to deliver the suppressant to where it needs to be. It's similar to running electrical in a lot of old houses. And even in Mount Vernon, there were sections of plaster that they had to remove in order to be able to get the access that they needed. So that's where I'm talking about either the sub panel or working from the top down with home runs to the electrical panel. You may have to remove a section of wall in order to get the wires to where they need to go, like the attic, in order to branch out from there. But removing that section of wall is not the worst case in the world if you have a plan to remove that wall, to repair it later, and know that removing that section is going to save you on damage by having a more thought out approach to doing the rest of the project.
And if you have a wall open, then it's worth looking at the other side. Do you need an outlet on the other side? If you've got the wall open once or the first time, might as well pay attention to what you might need in the room that's right beside it. If you need an outlet there, maybe that's a good place for a switch. And we did a lot of talking. I talked a lot to the electrician about what I wanted versus what he thought was in the best interest of him labor-wise and house-wise. So we had some outlets in certain places, and for instance, I have 2 bedrooms and they don't share an outlet, but there's an outlet on either side opposite of each other. We talked about that. Like, if we're going to do this outlet, then we should do the other one too. And then can we do it in the same spot? He's like, it's not the best spot. And he had a reason why. And I said, well, that's fine. I don't care. We can move it over. If we have to move it over to the next wall cavity or 2, who cares? But, I really trusted him to tell me what he thought was a good idea. And I had all these ideas like, we're going to put some electricity on the outside walls. And he said, it's going to be hard. Like, we can do it, but it's probably going to cause a lot more damage. And so I immediately just pivoted and said, okay, don't bother then. Let's figure out somewhere else. So as long as you're talking about it, communicating, hearing, listening, you're probably going to have a pretty good chance of getting a compromise that works for your wallet and also for your life.
And the more that I'm listening to us discuss this topic, the thing that's really kind of coming into my mind is, and what we keep saying over and over again, it's all about planning. It's all about taking a thoughtful approach to what you're doing to try to minimize damage. And it's all about having well-defined expectations both on your side and whoever you're hiring.
Exactly, which tends to be a common theme.
Yep.
in these listener questions and answers. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking about this today, Alex, offering your point of view. It was great to chat with you again.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I can't wait to be back in the future.
If you have an old house or DIY question that you would like for me and a guest to answer on an upcoming episode, please contact the show via the True Tales from Old Houses website or send me a direct message on Facebook or Instagram. And now it is your turn to answer a question. And we have a new one this season. I want to know, what have you learned since buying your old house? And here are a few of your answers from Instagram. Lauren has learned that a lot of contractors don't know how to properly work on old houses. Oh, Lauren, the sting of that lesson is still fresh on my mind. Too soon. Samantha and John from Our Old Vic wrote, you may think you have a schedule for fixes and updates, but the house has its own timeline. And Leslie says, sometimes you just have to outsource things. If you would like to share your own answer to this season's question, send me a direct message through social media or head on over to truetalesfromoldhouses.com and let me know via the contact form or click on the mic icon in the bottom right-hand corner to leave a voicemail using your phone or computer. Once again, this season's question is, what have you learned since buying your old house? Philosophical, practical? There are no wrong answers. Let me just take a moment to thank our sponsors. I mentioned them earlier, but True Tales from Old Houses exists because of their generous support. So thank you to the window course from Scott Seidler of the Craftsman blog and Abatron. The window course is a step-by-step, do-it-yourself program that will teach you everything you need to know to successfully restore your wood windows. It's self-paced, so you can go as fast or as slow as you need to, and there are several price points to fit your needs and budget. While I do consider window restoration a year-round sport, we are entering the very best time of year to get this work done. The days are longer, warmer, and drier. It's the perfect time to take the window course and make the most out of these next 6 to 8 months. How good would it feel to check a few windows off of your to-do list? If you sign up for the Lifetime Access Package or Training Package, you'll also get a free infrared paint remover, which is a $130 value. $130 right back in your pocket. The window course is offered with a money-back guarantee, and I've got a coupon code to share. Scott is offering True Tales from Old Houses listeners a special discount. For 10% off, visit thewindowcourse.com and use the coupon code TrueTales. True Tales from Old Houses is also supported by Abatron. Abatron manufactures two of my very favorite products on the planet, liquid wood and wood epox. Over the years, I've talked about both a bunch on Instagram and on my blog, and recently I've had a lot of questions about wood epox and liquid wood. So over the weekend, I did a short tutorial on how to use both. It's right in my Instagram highlights, and I'll put more on the Blake Hill House blog this week too. Wood epox and liquid wood make permanent, cost-effective repairs anywhere you find rotted or damaged wood. And whether you're a first-timer or a professional tradesperson, Abatron products are super easy to use. The instructions are simple. The results are exceptional. No shrinking or sagging, and repairs can be sanded and painted just like wood. Follow Abatron on Facebook and Instagram. You'll find them at Abatron Inc., as in incorporated. To purchase liquid wood and wood epox, visit abatron.com. Use the coupon code TrueTales10, that's the number 10, to save 10% on your order. My guest today is Alison Hardy. Alison's company, Window Woman of New England, is now a team of many, and Alison's breadth of experience made her a natural fit for several window restoration segments on This Old House, a perennial favorite in the old house community.
Hi, I'm Alison Hardy from Window Woman of New England. We're based in Amesbury, Mass., which is just north of Boston.
Hi, Alison. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
You and I frequently cross paths in the same old house circles, and as far as I'm concerned, you are a legend.
Well, I'm opinionated, if nothing else.
That could elevate you to legend status, absolutely. But I have not discovered that about you in a way that is negative. So I appreciate all your input always. The network itself is quite large, which is, I think, surprises most people.
It is. And, it's one of those things. I've been restoring windows for almost 20 years now. And after seeing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of windows, you see some patterns, you notice some trends. There are right and not so right ways to do things. And so, I feel like I have the validity of the history of looking at many, many, many windows. So I can weigh in a little heavier than maybe is polite sometimes, but it's only because I know a lot.
Your opinions are backed with a lot of experience. And that was my first question. I was going to say, I noticed that you have been in business for almost 20 years. Are you doing something special for your big anniversary?
We are actually. There's a local video company here that we've been starting to work with to put together, to dig through our archives and find all the fun stuff about how we got started and sort of recap where we are now, because it is it's an amazing milestone to me.
Right. Absolutely. And that's in 2023. Is that correct?
Correct. It's funny. I actually started my business earlier than that, but I can never remember dates. So I just chose January 1st, 2003 as my starting date. So I just go from that.
That makes sense to me. Sometimes it is hard to pin down those dates.
And the official paperwork too, because there's a lot of unofficial starting of businesses. And then it's like the minute you have to register for something, it's like, oh, I have to go up with a real date. Okay, well, here it is.
Right, exactly. Well, let's talk about how you got your start as a window restoration professional.
Owning an old house is how most of us get started. My background was in the textile industry. I grew up knowing how to sew. I thought I was going to be a historical costumer and then a theatrical costumer. And then I realized that those were great, but they didn't pay really well, and I have to work nights. So I actually went to work in New York City in the garment industry, and worked there for many years. Decided I was tired of New York, moved out to Boston, and then promptly met my husband who lived in Philadelphia. So we moved there and then moved back to Boston when he got a job in Boston, and we bought an old house. And we had somebody come by. It had a jumble sale of different types of windows and different condition issues on the windows. And we had somebody come and give us an estimate on fixing them. And I was like, well, that's a ridiculous amount of money. How hard can it be? So that's what got me started.
That's great. A lot of us come in through an effort to be thrifty with our old houses. I know that's certainly how I started, because I kept thinking, this is work that I'm capable of. And I think so many people feel that way too. So it's nice to be able to put a little sweat equity into those windows.
Yeah, and at a certain point, there's a humility to it that you say, human hands made this. I have human hands. I should be able to do this too. There's certainly different levels of skill along the way, but at a certain point, it's labor, and we can do it. So why not try it at least?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. How would you say, when you started your business, how has it changed through the years? What did you think you were doing in the beginning compared to what you are doing currently?
Well, first of all, it's called Window Woman because I thought it would be just me. My nickname in the textile industry was CAD Girl because I did computer aided design. And when I told my friend I was going to quit that and start working on windows, she said, "So what? Now you're going to be the window woman?" And I was like, that's not a bad name. So it stuck with me. And I think it lasted all of about 2 weeks. And I was like, this is way too labor intensive. I'll never get anything done. I need help. And like, honestly, one of the first people I did an estimate for, she said, well, I'm out of work and I'm kind of interested. So do you need a helper? I'm like, yes, you're hired. And I never just changed it to Window Women because it just didn't make sense. So now I have a crew of about 14 people, and we're both women and men.
So has the work itself changed?
Magically paint does not jump off windows like it should by now, but it doesn't. The quality of our work is way better than when I started because my crew has a lot more patience than I do. And I think it's also working in a team environment. Your quality standards go up because you're sort of looking what other people are doing. And you think, well, I could do a little bit better, I guess, or somebody shows you a different technique. Honestly, the quality of repairs that we do now is so much better than I was ever able to do because I'm not a woodworker. So now our quality of repairs is awesome. We can build things from scratch that I certainly couldn't do. And I think the quality of the paint removal is much better. We had a job recently where somebody years ago had stripped these windows and it was so bad. So my crew person took a picture of it. I'm like, that's our training photo. Do not strip windows to look like this.
Have the tools changed at all?
We have a lot more of them. With more people, you get more tools. But, at the end of the day, it's still hand scraping. I mean, we do have a steam stripper. We do have the infrared paint removers. But honestly, it's scraping, 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 sanding, 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 sanding. There's just we keep trying to devise a miracle device to do it, but there just isn't one.
No. That's probably one of the most common questions that I get on social media is, how can I make this easier? And I always feel so bad when I have to tell them, well, here's the thing. Let's think about, is it difficult or is it just time consuming? Because unfortunately, we can't change how long it takes to remove paint. There are things that help, like you said, infrared, steam, whatnot, good scrapers, keeping those things sharp. But it just takes the time it takes, especially if we're not professionals, if we're doing this at home.
And it's so unpredictable because some windows, a good swipe with a scraper and all the paint comes off. And others, you are dealing with layer after layer of sticky layer and none of it wants to budge. So, from day to day, you don't know what you're going to encounter.
Right. So I imagine when you started, and I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you were one of the few women in trades and certainly window restoration trades.
I don't know because I looked at people like Hilda Dent, who has been doing this longer than I have. I think it's always been one of the few trades that's friendly and accessible to women, unlike timber framing, which is not as quite as accepting. But I think it's because things are a small scale, they're manageable, and it's very detailed. It seems to be something that women gravitate towards.
Have you felt like your job has been more difficult because you are a woman? Or on the flip side, how has it been easier?
It's actually somewhat easier because so many people have said, I really wanted to work with a woman-owned company. As always, it's the reputation that gets us the job. So at least being a woman-owned company gets us in the door sometimes. But at the end of the day, they're hiring for quality. So it doesn't really matter who does the work.
Right. I find small hands. I these little hands, they can get in anywhere. It's just a pure physical difference between myself and at least the men in my household. They have giant hands.
Yeah, it's funny putting together a team because, we've gravitated to now we're working on a lot of church windows. So they're big, they're heavy, they're awkward, but still sometimes you're right. Feeding things through to get to the weight pocket, a small hand will get you a lot longer way than brute strength. So it's always a matter of trying to put together the right skills for the right project because some of them really require brute strength and others it's like don't touch anything, just gentle
Right.
so, and I'm always like persistence wins the day. I don't have a lot of physical strength, but I'm very persistent, so I will pry bar away gently for hours, where some of my colleagues do not have the patience for it.
I appreciate that quality. How do you put your team together? And is there a lot of turnover?
It kind of comes and goes. We aim for no turnover, but life happens. It's funny how our interview process has changed. I'm terrible at interviewing people. I like everyone from day one, but I now basically have the crew interview people. They pick up on different things that I wouldn't pick up on. Some funny things that we have kind of figured out will determine good employees versus bad employees is can they find our shop without asking for lots of directions? Our shop is not hard to find, but it's definitely not right out on the main drag. So, the people who say, well, I plan to get here 15 minutes early in case I got lost. We love those kind of people. We often ask them, what kind of hobbies they have, because people who do things in their spare time, whether it's, building guitars or weaving baskets, those are our kind of people who are always active and doing something and curious about things and trying things. We find that people who are afraid to try things don't fit in well here because we're always trying new things
Right.
here. So it's kind of like, I don't know, let's see if it works. And then it's the awareness of everyone around you. It's always been something. When my first shop was really tiny, it was 480 square feet with 4 people. So you knew where everybody was at all times. And even though now I have a 5,000 square foot space, it's still important to know where everybody is. Because if you're moving a big piece of glass, you don't want to turn around suddenly and gore somebody with
Right.
glass. So that sort of awareness of people around you. So often in interviews, somebody will walk behind somebody and drop something and see if they notice. It's really stupid, but it's a skill that we need. We need people who are aware of their surroundings. So we don't look for any particular resume of where you went to school or Or do you know how to use every power tool in the shop? We're really looking for personalities, and we're looking for that curiosity and the willingness to try stuff because nobody comes into this business knowing how to work on Windows. So we have to teach you everything. So might as well be curious.
Do you still find surprises in your work, or do you feel like at this point, after 20 years, you've seen almost everything?
We have seen a lot, but every now and then somebody had a genius new idea to try something different. And you're like, really? I have no idea how that works, but okay, fine. We'll figure it out. Yeah, every now and then we still find funky things.
That's another thing that I think is a rude awakening for people who want to work on their windows, is that it's different every time. Even the same window with the same pattern in the same room, there will be something about it that's a little different, a little harder, maybe a little easier. It's just the nature of the beast.
Oh, even this week, I did an estimate for somebody who we worked for years ago. And he was saying, I really wish that you had done the front stops the right way with the screws and the finish washers. And I said, well, let me tell you, some people don't like that because, if you have blinds, they'll catch on the finish washers. They really aren't the right washers for windows. They're attractive, but you really want the stop bead adjusters that sink in. But I actually prefer nails because then I can pry them out without damaging anything and I don't have to dig out the screws. And the guy's just looking at me like, I'm like, yeah, I can go on about front stops for at least a half an hour because there's so many variations on how you could put that one little piece of trim in. Nobody ever thinks about that, but I look at gazillion of them, and every single time we're like, well, do we put it back that way? Or, do we put back the round head screws that protrude? Do we countersink the screws because they do have a particular blind or shutter that needs to be a flush fit? It's ridiculous how many details there are to it.
Right. And it's interesting that you mentioned the right way. There are some variations because we are in present day times.
Yeah. Different window treatments evolve differently. And, we all kind of have to figure out what's the most significant thing. When I got started, I saved every parting bead. I thought, because I didn't know how to make them. So I very carefully saved them and, very carefully sanded them down. And now I'm like, you know what? That is not the most historically significant part of this window. We're going to replace it so it's nice and clean and I don't have to think about it. Unless it's an unusual shape or profile, which we get those too.
Right.
But most of the time, we just replace the parting bead.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about your recent experience on This Old House. Now, if I am correct, it was not your first time. You've been on the show before.
We were on the show in 2011. Yes.
Okay. So tell me about the first show, and then let's talk about your more recent experience too.
So as always, the homeowner really drives the process of what they want to do. The first project was the Bedford project in 2011. And those homeowners definitely wanted to restore the windows. And so they went around looking for a window restoration contractor. Funny enough, way back in 2002, 2003, the host, Kevin O'Connor, bought a two-family house in Beverly, Mass. And had some windows to be fixed up. So I was working for him just as he got the host job and really just as we were starting Window Woman. So he knew me. We had also, when we bought our 1850s farmhouse, reached out to This Old House because we had some issues with not having gutters. So they did an Ask This Old House segment on our house in 2002. Must have been something like that. So Tom Silva knew us too. My name came up in the rotation. They reached out and, it's like, sure, we'll restore the windows for this house. That was a lovely project and a good project to work on. And it turned into, they actually did 3 episodes on that project for the series.
That was the one in 2011?
2011.
And then recently, and I went to go watch the segment and unfortunately I missed it, so I didn't get to see it. I'm hoping I can catch the entire show soon. I'll have to look at my current PBS network.
Right. So this latest one was kind of odd because we took this project, restoring windows it's called the Center School in Drake, Mass. It's west of here. It's a beautiful 1898 school that had pretty much been abandoned by the town. But it's right literally center to the town. So kind of a significant property. And a group bought it to develop it into affordable veterans housing.
Okay.
So I don't know, somehow we won the bid to do the windows. We're working away on these windows. And I'm watching this old house one night and they talk about the Drake at school. I'm like, wait a minute, we're working on that project. So I just reached out to the contractor we're working for and said, if ever they want to do more segments on the Drake at school, we'd be happy to talk about windows with them. So that started that whole conversation. And apparently, with the supply chain issues and everything, the projects that this old house is working on, they've had some significant problems with meeting deadlines and filming schedules because stuff just isn't there. You can't talk about kitchen cabinets if you don't have kitchen cabinets. So they're trying to fill in with all these other stories. It just happened to work out that we were available to fill in for those other stories.
Oh, that's great. So how many windows are you doing there? Are you done? Is this past history?
We are not done. We're kind of halfway through. There are 50 windows total, and they're big. And we had to custom build 3 new ones because one, the attic window, is just long gone. It's a round window. There were shards of it left, and that was about it. And then there were 2 on the back side of the building that had been converted to doors. The building had been used as town offices for a while, so they needed extra egress doors. We lost 2 windows, but the openings are still there. So we're building windows to go back into those openings. But the rest of them are all just restorations.
So what you're talking about has actually made me think of a different question. And that is, how do you work around, or not around, you don't work around, work with current codes and windows when you're working with these old ones? Because I hear so many people say, oh, we have to take them out because it's against code. How does that really work?
It is definitely a challenge. It's interesting how the historic designation of a property makes a difference because they get exemption to certain parts of the building code. To a large extent, the building inspector, at least here in Massachusetts, has a lot of sway over what they approve and don't approve on projects. So it gets to be an interesting challenge. One of the hard things is that understanding that for building codes, you have 2 methods that you can approach it. There's the predictive, which is to say, if I buy this box of product A, it will meet code. And the other is the prescriptive, which is we do this and then we test it to make sure it meets code. Obviously, buying a box is cheaper, faster, and easier. Everybody just signs off the paperwork and nobody actually cares if the windows are energy efficient, but they meet code. So life is good. The other way is much more difficult, but it's not impossible. It's just it requires an extra step to actually do the measuring if the building inspector really wants to hold their feet to the fire to do that. But again, if it's a designated historic building, they don't necessarily have to do that. There is surprisingly a lot of gray area to these things.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever find that you have to, especially in a building, I'm thinking about you're creating in the school, the veterans housing. So that's definitely probably has a lot of red tape involved with everything from start to finish. And do you find yourself in projects like that having to add things like safety bars? I mean, the only thing I can think of is safety bars, but like if the window is too low or if it's too high or for fire safety or whatnot.
Yeah, there's typically it's called a sash limiter. So the window can only be opened a certain number of inches if the window is a certain number of feet off the ground. So we will definitely be putting in sash limiters. The Drake at School is actually doing it the right way and putting on storm windows as well. So those are another part of the safety package that goes with it, plus the performance package of the window, because obviously with a good storm window, you have much better energy efficiency than just a single window.
Absolutely. So for homeowners, when they want to restore their windows, do they run up against codes also?
No, because our work is considered maintenance in kind. We're not changing unless they're putting in a totally new window, unless they're putting in, a whole addition. But even so, typically we can meet whatever we need to get the requirements satisfied.
There must be a ton of inspections with a public project like this.
It actually is private, sort of. It's a weird hybrid. I don't quite understand the whole financing that they're doing to it, but we just do what they tell us to do. But
Right. And you have, I guess, a series of inspections along the way.
Yeah, we because there are 50 windows, we couldn't just, you have to basically strip all the paint off, and then somebody has to come and look at it to make sure that they're lead paint free before you do any repairs, before you do any reglazing, before you do any painting. So if we waited until all 50 were stripped, then, my shop's sitting around twiddling their thumbs going, oh my God, and we have to store these things. So we try to break it into batches so that they can come, inspect them. We can keep working, do the next batch, and it flows much better that way.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of an annoyance to the inspectors because they would prefer to do it all in one shot, but we can't work that way.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense. I feel like I'm going all over with this interview today, but I want to go back to this old house for just a minute because I want to know from you, what is it like to work with the cast and crew of this old house?
It's a really interesting experience because there is no script. The host usually has a series of questions that they have thought of in advance that they want to talk to, and the producer is kind of, they'll often call me and sort of talk through what we're going to see. But from then on, it really is, we're having a conversation. We're talking about different things. Again, my problem is I can go down the rabbit hole of obscure knowledge at any time. So they try to be like, we're not, no, move on. The last episode we filmed, we were installing windows, and I had set up this whole thing with the sash weights because the sash weights are numbered as to how much they weigh. And, Kevin O'Connor's kind of like, I never noticed that. That's really kind of cool. And I'm like, I thought it was kind of cool too. That's why we did it. And like the third take, the director's like, yeah, no, can we just like skip ahead to like, this sash weighs 30 pounds. So you're going to need two 15-pound weights and just move through. And I'm like, okay.
But you're missing the good part, right?
I thought it was the good part. We're in a school. I thought I would do some educating, right? So it's funny how the things evolve, and they often want to see things, and I'm like, I'm not showing that on TV. Sorry, no, that is just not going to happen. It's too awkward. It looks dangerous. We know it's not, but it just doesn't look safe on TV. So
right.
We just don't want to go there, and they. They'll push back pretty hard sometimes, but at the end of the day, it's kind of like, if I'm not comfortable showing that, we are not going to show that. So they're respectful of that.
That's great. I've heard a lot of experiences at this point about people who filmed for other network shows, but I was curious about this old house. It always looks or feels more low key than other network shows, which thrive on other people's stress.
Right. And I think they really are trying to educate and trying to, understand the process more than just show sledgehammers flying and stuff. That's, a lot of shows, that's all they want is the drama of the moment. But this old house really does kind of want to educate people and offer up some best practices if they can.
All right. Well, we're reaching the end of our time together. So I thought a good question to ask you as a professional and long-time window restorer is, what would you like homeowners to know, or how would you encourage them to keep their old windows? And I've asked this question to a lot of people, but I always appreciate the answers.
I really would love if before homeowners just go embarking on a path is that they really ask somebody who's a historic preservation professional to what they should know about these windows. Because half the time I'm educating people. I'm like, look at the glass, look at the construction. I can tell that this window is built around this time. This one's different. And people really, once they know something unique and special about their house, they treasure it that much more. They're cranky, they do things, but it's, why throw something out if you don't really understand it and if you haven't really given it a chance to, fight for itself. I find that about a lot of old houses. People just like, it's dirty, it's gross. It's like, well, wash it, just give it a little love for a moment before you go chucking it out. Because a lot of times you chuck it out and then it's like, now I can't find anything that's even close to it. I'm like, you're correct. You cannot find anything close to it. So I just had a woman stop by last week who had a car full of windows because she replaced her original windows with a replacement window company, and they're all rotting and she hates them. And she's been searching for salvage windows to put back into her house. And I'm like, this is why I always encourage people to store your old windows. Don't just put them in a landfill. Just put them in the attic, put them in a basement. The next homeowner will thank you profusely for doing that. So, yeah, it's really just a matter of slow down, take a look at what you have, really think about how you use them, because a lot of times we modify windows. If it's a kid's bedroom, we want it to be easier to open and close than a third floor window in the attic. Yeah, it's hard to open, but you only go up there once a year, so who cares, right? So there's definitely a lot of push me, pull you on these kind of things.
A lot more flexibility, I think, than people realize.
Yeah. And it's just because something's old and dirty now doesn't mean it always has to be old and dirty. It can be cleaned up and spiffed up and look awfully nice.
I agree. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today, Alison. It was so nice to talk to you face to face and to get to know you better, too.
I love what you're doing. I think it's a great podcast. And I've learned about a bunch of people that I've known, but didn't really know their backgrounds until I heard them on your podcast. So it's cool.
Thank you. That's one of my favorite parts, is finding out what people did before they became the person or started doing the work that they're doing now.
And most people in historic preservation all had a background before. Nobody comes to this as their first career.
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely love hearing about that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Alison.
My pleasure.
Bye. Thank you for listening to True Tales from Old Houses. And thank you to my guests, Alison and Alex. I'll drop a link to the Window Woman of New England website right in the show notes. To continue the conversation, be sure to follow True Tales from Old Houses and Blake Hill House on Facebook and Instagram. For bonus content and special offerings, please consider becoming a subscriber on our brand new Patreon. And if you have a moment, I'm not going to stop you from leaving a rating or review wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. If you're looking for more information about this episode, including the tour to Scotland and Northern Ireland, photos, show notes, coupon codes, and to request a transcript, visit truetalesfromoldhouses.com. Until next time.